Hello everyone, how's it going? It's just me today, as you can see. Welcome. The 5 of you that I see may be watching, and Jacqueline, good to see you, as always. So Abby was going to be here, and then something came up today, very serious. Not sure what I should be disclosing about personal business and whatnot, but one of her family members has been shot. So I'll just say that, and I'll let her tell you guys what's happened when you can see her again. So yeah, Django, X1, where is my sis? She said that her nephew, which I don't think is a blood relative nephew, was shot today. So she's had to go help out for an emergency. So you might want to give her a call and see if she needs any help or anything. So that's the nature of the beast here. So sometimes we got to do an audible and do things on our own. Yeah. Sorry to put somebody's business out there, but I hope he's okay, right? Because there's a lot of violence going around right now, and we got to try and keep our shit together, and it's not easy, and sometimes we got to roll with the punches, I guess, right? That's all we can do. So, yeah, good. He's saying he was shot last night, so, but I hope that everything in that situation is resolved as correctly as possible. So, yeah, but let's not get too hung up on that. I'm going to try and let you guys know what I was going to talk about today. So the title of the show is Youth Protesters, the Cause versus Youth Agitators, Controlled Opposition to the Cause. So I wanted to talk about the Gen Z protests, the so-called Gen Z protests spreading around the world. And I've been somewhat suspicious of the narrative. I think anyone interested in politics rightly should be, taking the official story with a grain of salt at least. So to kind of remind people who might not be following the news too closely, there was a string of protests like all around the world, from Morocco to Serbia to Kenya to Madagascar to Nepal, to the Philippines and Indonesia. So there seems to be a massive coordinated movement of, I would say, I guess, working class and what do you call the youth who aren't technically working in the workforce yet, but are I guess a lot of youth are in fact already working class. They're working their first jobs or second jobs. Some of them are seeking to join the working class. I guess for simplicity's sake, a lot of people would say they are, if their family is working class, they're working class and whatnot. And if they're going to become working class, or if they're going to start a business, would be the distinction that you would want to try and maintain. I would say if people try and start up their own small business, that would be petty bourgeois and not working class. So just because you're young doesn't mean you're working class. So that's something to keep in mind. But to try and assume that the youth protests, just because the media is labeling them as Gen Z protests, that the youth aren't genuinely very politically active, and that there are distinctions about this generation due to the time period that we are going through, that we're living in. There is certainly a very real kind of radicalism to the youth these days that we need to study and guide and learn from all at once. So there's been a lot of failures in the communist movements worldwide, a lot of loss of faith in the older generations, often rightly so, and sometimes once you learn the details and the nuance, unfairly so. But these are the praxis that we need to analyze to be able to apply our dialectical materialist methods more effectively to actually accomplish change, because that's what we're trying to do, right? Actually get out of this hell that we're been pushed into. It's not that we're just trying to achieve idealistic change. We are trying to get out of the trap that's been set for us. So yeah, I'm just gonna I don't need to call every comment up on the screen, but yeah. I was about to ask, Jacqueline says, if these protests were all coordinated, but you answered my question before I had the chance to ask it. I was asking myself if they're coordinated. I don't exactly have a smoking gun proof, but if I feel like I've come across enough circumstantial evidence for me to be satisfied that there's definitely some coordination taking place. The question that I have yet to properly answer to my satisfaction is, to what extent are these protests color revolution oriented or genuinely revolutionary? So that might take more than just one episode, but I'll do my best here. So can someone please explain to me the ages of the generations and what they're called? So I'm pretty sure this is kind of a modern phenomenon in a long-term sense. The first generation that I remember anyone naming was the silent generation, which is way back in like World War I or World War II. I think it was World War I. The silent generation was, I forget specifically why they're called that. I think it has to do with their voices not really properly being heard, or them feeling afraid to speak out in the climate of the First World War. They didn't have the political influence for their voices to be democratically heard, I guess. I don't know, for lack of a better word, but they should have had the electoral clout. Had they been listened to, or had they had the ability to find their voice, they could have really changed things, but they did not. So baby boomers come still after that. Baby boomers are after the end of World War II, because before the baby boomers, this is what I'm starting before people even remember these generations, right? After the silent generation, there's like the GI generation, the generation that went to fight World War II, and they're called that for obvious reasons. They're the GO, right? The American so-called not fascist, whatever, fighting the fascist, right? But we all know how that turned out. And then there's the baby boomers, and that name's pretty self-explanatory. They are the generation that is extra big, whatever, extra large, because they were the GI generation returning who survived. We're very grateful they were still alive, and there was this big boom in the American economy to give them the ability to have as many kids as they wanted. And so now we know all about the baby boomers. And then there's Gen X, follows the baby boomers. After Gen X comes, what is it? Millennial, pretty sure. Goes boomers, Gen X, millennial. And then after millennial is Generation Z. And then after Generation Z is Generation Alpha. And that's where we're at. So I forget why they call them Gen X, though. I think it's just because they're like radical, you know, they were extreme, you know, that kind of, I don't know. I'd have to look that up, but that's getting kind of distracted. So onward to my presentation. I didn't have any videos, so that's why I didn't start out with a video today, because I got stuck doing my research like I like to do about all, like, reading all these articles and stuff. So maybe I will find one to start with. Especially, I feel it's important for us, those of us like myself who have children, to try and have an idea about what's happening to the youth, or what are the youth trying to do, trying to be like. Because if we're out of touch as older people, I'm not even that old, right? If I'm already out of touch, that's not a good sign. So let's start with this one. Here we go. Pardon me, my computer's quite slow. I didn't quite have time to do my proper maintenance. I actually had to crash my computer, turn it off and turn it back on quickly before the stream started, so that I could, because it was not responding. So from anime to activism, how the One Piece pirate flag became the global emblem of Gen Z resistance. So I saw this One Piece pirate flag involved in these protests, and that kind of got the wheels churning, got me curious as to what's behind this, because it's a corporate logo being used in a supposedly rebellious left-wing kind of way. And that always kind of sets off alarm bells for me. It could very well be completely innocent and spontaneous of the youth claiming the symbol and using it of their own accord. But I also know how the American false revolution machine works, how they like to co-opt every movement that could be a threat and turn it into something that's a threat to the working class. So I strongly suspect that the encouragement, or the widespread adoption of this, was likely influenced by neoliberals and corporate kinds of neocons who want to try and distort every revolutionary character so as to head off actual revolution. So from Paris and Rome to Jakarta, Indonesia, and New York, a curious banner has appeared in protest squares. With hollow cheeks, a broad grin, and a straw hat with a red band, the figure is instantly recognizable and has been hoisted by young demonstrators calling for change. In Kathmandu, Nepal, where anger at the government boiled over in September 25, which we've talked about, the flag became the defining image as flames spread through the gates of Singha Durbar, Nepal's ornate palace complex and seat of power. So this is sort of how it's apparently being used around the world. The image usually adorning a flag with a black background comes from One Piece, a much beloved Japanese manga. And I would just like to ask, by the way, anyone in the audience, have you guys might be a little of the older generations, as we were just discussing, but have you ever heard of this One Piece? Anyone have any interest in Japanese manga? Because I know that my kids have an interest in some Japanese culture and and my ex enjoys some of that manga. So I bet you they've heard of it, but I don't know. So let me know if you've read any of it or seen any of the TV shows or movies or whatever. If you like the content. What's up, John H? Good to see you. Yeah, see you say you've heard of it, but you haven't watched it. So maybe you might be interested in taking a gander at it and seeing what it's all about. But it's one of the most prolific comic series. It's actually, I think, the number one world's best selling comic. It's sold 600 million copies or something. So that right there is, even if it's some kind of corporate manipulation psyop of the youth, the fact that many people have read it, it does kind of give them some common culture narrative that the kids can relate to, and they may reference as metaphor for what they're experiencing. Because I see this a lot when you talk to people who play a lot of video games or something. They other people who don't play games, when they try and make a metaphor about a situation, they don't use the reference of a video game character to make their point. But those younger kids who spend way too much time on the screen, if you try and talk about something like geopolitics, wherever, they'll use a reference about some kind of anime character or whatever as to what they see, how they relate to what you're describing in reality. So Gen Xers, older people, might kind of resort to Star Wars or something. Say we're like the Jedi and they're like the Sith or whatever. It's so clear or whatever who's on the right side of history. So the culture that we consume growing up definitely has an impact on the way that we see what's happening. So let me get back to this article. And what began as a fictional pirate crew's emblem almost 3 decades ago has become a powerful symbol of youth-led resistance, appearing in demonstrations from Indonesia and Nepal to the Philippines and France. So another current that I noticed that I might not really be able to get into much today because I have to do more research. These kinds of topics require a lot of research. When I look at the countries involved, Indonesia, Nepal, Philippines, and France, I see Maoism is something to do with this, right? So there has been historically a strong Maoist presence in all of these countries. It's been very popular with the left in these countries. And when we're asking what kind of how should I put this? What kind of strength does the Maoist movement have today? Is it declining? Is it reviving? I think this is the kind of evidence that we would want to look at to make that kind of a claim as to determine what we believe is happening. So, as a scholar of media and democracy, I see the spread of the Jolly Roger of the Straw Hats Pirates, which has gone from manga pages to protest squares, as an example of how Gen Z is reshaping the cultural vocabulary of dissent. So we saw they're waving it in Nepal, they're waving it in this picture in the Philippines. Pop culture as political expression. One Piece arrived at the birth of Gen Z, created in 1997 by Japanese manga artist Ichiro Oda, who is, by the way, I checked his net worth. Let me just share this tab briefly. Born in 1975. Oops, what's going on? I don't know why it's gray. There we go. But if you can see here, as of 2025, according to cinenetworth.com, which was like, I thought it was citing Forbes or something, but anyway, it says net worth is estimated to be around 1.5 billion according to Forbes, right there. Yeah, so this significant wealth is primarily attributed to a successful manga series, One Piece. So I get a little bit disconcerted, even if it's genuine, spontaneous Gen Z radicalism. I think it's tainted in a way if they are like, you shouldn't be using a billionaire's symbol for your anti-capitalist revolution. Is that just common sense to anyone else? Right? And what's up, Kieran Pine? Pac-Man not cutting it? Yeah, and that's that actually, I'm glad you said that, because you remind me, one thing that made me feel like this is like a trend that we should be on the lookout for. Remember the Luigi Mangione story, and how it just so happened to be really important for everyone to attach their respect and support for Luigi Mangione to the symbol of the corporate Nintendo mascot of the Luigi character. So in this way, I feel like it's like a cognitive capture. A lot of people would say I'm like maybe just kind of nitpicking or whatever, splitting hairs or something, but I don't think it's good for our trying to develop class consciousness to be using the symbolism and the imagery of billionaires to try and somehow make our point coherently. So let me know what you think about that. So since then, since 1997, it has sold more than 500 million copies and has a Guinness World Record for its publishing success. It has spawned a long-running TV series, live-action films, and a more than $20 billion industry. Yeah, very revolutionary, very anti-capitalist. With merchandise licensing alone generating about 720 million each year from Bandai Namco, a company best known for creating Pac-Man and Tekken. I feel like Kieran Pine, you kind of know about. Have you read the One Piece series there? You might have already known that they also own Pac-Man, or maybe it was just a coincidence. But anyway, at its core, One Piece follows Monkey D. Luffy and his crew, the Straw Hat Pirates, as they challenge a corrupt world government while seeking freedom and adventure. For fans, the One Piece flag is not a casual decoration, but an emblem of defiance and perseverance. Luffy's ability to stretch beyond physical limits after consuming a magical fruit has become a powerful metaphor for resilience. Also sounds like kind of like, how the Empire is always the one that's actually pushing the drugs while claiming to be anti-drug, and then the hero of their movement is cherished because of their ability to stretch beyond physical limits after consuming a magical fruit. Yeah, I don't know. We got too much of a problem with drug culture, right? We don't want to celebrate that or valorize it, lionize it, right? Although I understand how there's a lot of debate to be had on that discussion. So while his unwavering quest for freedom against impossible odds resonates with young people navigating political environments marked by corruption, inequality, and authoritarian excess. When protesters adopt this flag, they are not simply importing an aesthetic from popular culture, but are drawing on a narrative already legible to millions. The flag began cropping up in protest over the past few years. It was being waved at a Free Palestine protest in 2023 in Indonesia, and in the same year in New York during a pro-Palestinian demonstration. But it was in Indonesia in August 2025 that the flag's political life truly took hold. There, protesters embraced it to voice frustration with government policies and mounting discontent over corruption and inequality. The timing coincided with government calls for patriotic displays during independence celebrations, sharpening the contrast between official nationalism and grassroots dissent. Now, Indonesia, I've been meaning to do some looking into, and I really got to talk about that, do a whole episode on Indonesia one day, because that's a country that very seriously, legitimately needs to have like protest like this. If people are criticizing, controlled opposition, these people, Indonesia has just joined BRICS, right? We should support them no matter what they do to whoever they do it to, because the bigger picture is what matters. The bigger players are what matters, right? And that's kind of this Cold War mentality that people are simultaneously potentially denouncing that other people have while they continue to use it, maybe without even realizing. Although I feel like it's really just disingenuous in general of them. I feel like in a lot of ways people completely understand that the situation with the BRICS is like a return to a bipolar world as opposed to this polarity that they keep promising. Because the real issue with this multipolarity thing is who constitutes a pole, right? So are you actually talking about a way to bring the little guys up in, instead of just maintaining the sphere of influence around the big players? Because Indonesia's economy is like completely in the shitter. All right, it's one of those things like if you remember when we were talking about Somalia, they have a really low inflation rate, but that's completely obscuring and masking the true disaster and crisis that's underlying it. When you go to look at the value of their currency, you really start to see the actual situation. So I don't know if I still have it called up somewhere, but when I look up the exchange rate between the Canadian dollar and the Indonesian rupiah, there is like 4 zeros behind the decimal for the rupiah to exchange for $1 Canadian. So that's a country that would be experiencing extreme inflation in the like 600% kind of range, uh, if they hadn't utterly demolished the value of their currency. And so, what does that mean? Just like Somalia, they are most likely forced to use dollars for everyday transactions within their own country, not just cross-border transactions. So their country is captured by the dollar in a very massive way. And the reason why is you have to look at history. If you don't look at the history around the world and you just want to focus on the history of your own country, you're not going to understand why things are the way they are at all. So Indonesia is known very well for a massive anti-communist purge, one of the biggest genocides in history. After the okay, so there's Sukarno and Suharto, and Sukarno's the good one, and Suharto's the bad one. Okay, so Sukarno was like the guy who brought independence to Indonesia to begin with, after, because like always comes back to colonialism. I think it was the British in Indonesia. They or maybe the French. No, it was the Dutch. Sorry. So when they overthrew the Dutch, it was because the Japanese what the fuckery that the Japanese were doing with the Chinese and stuff. They were all over Southeast Asia and stuff, and they kind of, their imperialist aggression gave countries like Indonesia an ironic opportunity to gain independence because they destabilized and weakened the Western colonial powers. That's not to give any kind of forgiveness to Japan for what it was trying to do at that time. It was trying to be an empire, and it was trying to be just as fascist as Germany and Italy and whatnot, right? But there's a whole history to Japan before they became fascist that no one ever talks about. We tend to, I think, what has happened with Holocaust remembrance, or people would. I heard a term called the Holocaust industrial complex, and I think that that's a great term to keep in mind, because I think what's happened with Japan is in our modern collective, the popular mind, Japan is seen as a victim because of the Americans dropping the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And if that's like what they say, history started on October 7th, like we like to say, if we forget about the history of Japan before the end of World War II, we very much risk not being able to understand the character of that nation, because we kind of all we see is the anime that they produce, the fancy technology, the Sony, like the PlayStations and stuff. Isn't that all great, right? So Japan is masterfully put off the image of being very cute and innocent, but there's something sinister to them in what their recent changes in their politics, just like the recent changes in Germany. There's a bit of a alarming potential return to fascism that seems to be occurring in Japan. So I'm trying to be open minded, and I thought if anyone wanted to be getting out from underneath the American thumb, it would be the Japanese, based on what happened with them, with, as I mentioned, being nuked. But I think the psyche of their country was pretty powerfully damaged, and they maybe are having a hard time embracing kind of revolutionary collective uh, national, like nationalist liberation um, ideology for themselves because of the generational trauma. That's something that has to be factored in, and it's something also with Indonesians, okay, because of what Suharto did, where they did a coup against Sukarno because he was trying to do an anti-imperialist like pushback against the West. To like, there's a theme, a pattern all around the world. You have countries that are they understand what they need to do for the success of their country is to push out the foreigners, right, and have like a Philippines first or an Indonesia first kind of policy. If the Americans are allowed to, whatever, shouldn't that mean that the rest of every other nation should have, sovereign nation should have the right to adopt their own nation first policies, right? In theory, that's the way it should be. In reality, when a third world nation tries to have their nation first policy, the Americans come around and say, "Nice try, you're not allowed to do that." So the Americans, the CIA, they definitely, with the whole domino theory that they had during the Cold War, they intentionally destroyed many of these countries, and they created this generational trauma that if even though there's literally nothing wrong with the theory of communism, the problem is the communists themselves. We have to be the ones to put some of this stuff into action, and we cannot do that if we have been traumatized and like materially been the means to wage struggle have been taken from us. So it's a really dirty, ugly history that we have to sift through to be able to figure out where to go from here, because that's what we're really trying to do. We're not just trying to relitigate all the conflict and contradiction. We're trying to resolve it, to sublate it. So the only way to do that is to understand what really happened, and to do that we have to get into all this contentious who were the real communists and who was the controlled opposition and all that. And we might get it wrong, but we have to try. And by getting it wrong, those of us who do, I think the important thing about that is it gives those people who will get it right the data and the opportunity to correct our mistake. And that's why we have to do it publicly. As much as I would prefer to have a lot of these conversations in private because they're so controversial and uncomfortable, stressful, what we need to do is show our homework, whatever, show our mistakes and learn from them. Even if we don't learn, because that's the thing, a lot of our mistakes we don't learn from. We don't see them, but other people do. So that's where, even if I suck at my job, whatever, hopefully my job is important for the movement, because I know a lot of people are trying to gatekeep who's allowed to be a revolutionary these days, and that is a massive way to ensure that we never succeed. So let's try and give credit where credit's due and recognize good faith effort. So I've been just kind of rambling for a moment here for quite a while. So how's it going, everybody joining us? Abby, good to see you. Rondo and Sean and Wesley and Golden Monarch. Good to see you all. Don't forget to like and share and subscribe. Woohoo! Sorry, let me see what you guys, some of what you're saying. Yeah, we were planning to have Abby here, and she was going to talk a little bit of some of these actual controlled opposition influencers trying to influence the youth. I see you guys talking about Nick Fuentes, and she was going to get into a little bit of, I think, Harry Sisson and people like him. There's a couple others. I don't remember their names because they're Americans and I don't really get them in my feed, but we might talk about those guys another time. So what's Kieran saying? Honestly, we cannot remember, Michael. Consumed so much, other than the truly outstanding in interpretations. Bit of a blur. Could be this week. One's brain is a scrambled egg. Yeah, it's a crazy week. It's the October 7th week. And so that's, I guess, going to be a new... From here on forward, I will always... This time of year will never be the same. Well, this is the way it will be now. So I heard that apparently there's been a ceasefire, has been achieved. So we will find out in the coming days what it was really worth. I'm concerned that it's not genuine at all. I don't really. There's been so much lies and so many broken ceasefires. I don't think Israel can keep a ceasefire. I don't think there can be a two-state solution. I don't think people are listening to people like me. So we're gonna see them try and do a two-state solution. I'm gonna watch that fail. So let me know if I'm wrong. I probably don't need you to let me know. I'm going to be paying attention too. How's it going, Extra Bulla? Good to see you. Yeah. Okay, so let me get back to my my reading here. I wanted to get to a lot more than just one little article here, so I don't want to be here too late. So the movement gained momentum when authorities responded with strong criticism of the flag's use. So we're talking about in Indonesia here. Is a bit of the Streisand effect, that this is where the use of this symbol from people like the CIA, they really do know how to psychologically leverage this kind of symbolism. So I don't know. Speculation. The movement gained momentum when authorities responded with strong criticism of the flag's use, inadvertently drawing more attention to the symbol, the Streisand effect. Government officials characterized the displays as threats to national unity, while posters viewed them as legitimate expressions of political frustration. So just a little quick jump into the Indonesian politics, you just kind of need to understand who are they protesting, right? Because some prime ministers, presidents, yeah, everyone's got their criticisms, but do they really need to be, do we need to overthrow them? And let me see, where is he? Here we go. So this guy here, Prabowo Subianto, this is the president that they are opposing right now. So Prabowo Subianto Jojo Hadikusumo is an Indonesian politician, businessman, and former military officer who is serving as the 8th and current president of Indonesia since 2024. He was previously the 26th Minister of Defense under President Joko Widodo from 2019 to 2024. Prabowo is Indonesia's third president to have a military background after Suharto and Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, and is the oldest first-term president in Indonesian history. Prabowo graduated from the Indonesian Military Academy in 1970 and primarily served in the Special Forces until he was appointed to lead the Strategic Reserves Command. So you've got like a literal fucking Marine in charge of the country now. Does that seem like a good democratic person to put in charge? Later that same year, he was discharged from the military and subsequently banned from entering the United States for allegedly committing human rights abuses. And what were those human rights abuses? The genocide of the Indonesian communists on behalf of the Americans for the Cold War domino theory bullshit, whatever. We have to squash communism wherever we find it, treat it like the atheist communists are an existential threat to the known world order. So fuck this guy, right? So yeah, the thing is, he was banned from entering the United States, right? But guess who let him back in? Mr. Donald Trump. Okay, and so here I got a little bit of a. Before I get back to the first article. So Indonesian defense chief, this is from the New York Times, accused of rights abuses will visit the Pentagon. Prabowo Subianto, former head of Indonesia's feared special forces under Suharto and now the Minister of Defense, had been barred from entering the United States for years. And then watch the United States denounce the protesters, whatever, call for peace and respect for the rules-based order. So, as commander of Indonesia's special forces under Suharto in the late 1990s, Prabowo Subianto was blamed for atrocities committed by troops he had led. This was published October 14, 2020, and updated April 27, 2021 by Richard Paddock, who's probably a piece of shit. For 2 decades, Prabowo Subianto, a former Indonesian general, was a pariah in international affairs. Mr. Prabowo, once a son-in-law of the dictator Suharto, who died in 2008, and a past commander of Indonesia's feared special forces, was blamed for atrocities committed by troops he had led. Under Presidents Bill Clinton, George Bush, and Barack Obama, he was prohibited from visiting the United States. But now Mr. Prabowo is Indonesia's Minister of Defense, and the ban has been lifted. And now he's Indonesia's president or prime minister or whatever it is. At the invitation of Defense Secretary Mark Esper, Mr. Prabowo arrived in Washington this week and is expected to meet with top officials at the Pentagon on Thursday. For Mr. Prabowo, while on his trip, the visit is the culmination of a years-long quest to gain respectability, because every genocidal criminal will be on, for the rest of their lives, a years-long quest to regain respectability they should never be allowed to have ever again. And the only kinds of people who will ever try and whitewash them are people like Trump. Okay, people like back in the day, like Churchill, whatever. Same kind of thing happened with their legacy, right? So if we don't manage to oust these people from power, the history books will write them as heroes. And there are things we can do about that, but nothing easy. So for Washington, it highlights the significance of Indonesia, a potentially important U.S. ally against China, and further signals the relegation of human rights to a minor diplomatic concern. The ban that applied to Minister Prabowo had been lifted, and he will visit the U.S. to discuss cooperation. And the other thing, okay, I don't really need to read this whole article, is Indonesia has recently joined BRICS. So they're extremely important geopolitical peace that's being fought over between China and the Americans. So let me briefly, I guess I'm going on a tangent here, whatever. Hopefully we'll get back to the first article. Trump's trade deal with Indonesia explained. Indonesian exports to the U.S. will be subject to a 19% tariff for now, but otherwise there is a lot that could change. So I think that Trump is trying to give this guy, Prabowo, a good deal, whatever, so that he will kind of ruin BRICS for them, right? There's a lot of problematic members of BRICS that I feel the Americans feel that they can very effectively manipulate to sabotage BRICS. So we'll see what happens. Last week, after threatening Indonesia with a 32% tariff, President Trump announced that he had spoken directly with President Prabowo Subianto and that they agreed on the basic outline of a trade deal. This week, the United States and Indonesia released a joint statement providing a bit more detail, although we should keep in mind these terms may very well change. So you've got a deal that's not a deal, of course. But this article was written in July 24th, 2025, so a couple months ago already, but it's relevant, so it's not that long ago either. For now, taken at face value, it appears that Indonesian exports to the United States will be subject to a 19% tariff, while most U.S. exports to Indonesia will face no tariff barriers. Indonesia also committed to buying Boeing aircraft, increasing imports of U.S. agriculture and energy products, and reducing non-tariff barriers like cumbersome licensing requirements. So it seems to me like Prabowo there, Subianto, has lied down, just like Mark Carney. He has lied down to make a red carpet for Trump to walk all on into Indonesia. Okay, maybe that's a bit harsh, but I don't think so. Considering the type of I just explained the character of who this man has been and continues to be. I'm worried about the people in Indonesia or whatever right now, as hella dangerous as it is for all of us over here in the West. Like, their shit is really like very close to hitting the fan in a lot of these places around the world, and whatever, you can only hope and pray. Can you guys hear me? I see my browser. I got a message. My browser's lost connection to your screen share audio. So been having this problem where I need to restart my browser if the problem continues. So just let me know. It looks to me I still got levels bouncing, so I think you guys could probably hear me. So yeah, we're gonna have to steel ourselves to witness some horrible shit, I think. So, but that doesn't mean that we're just gonna. We best do our best not to just freeze and watch and get traumatized. Where we want to stop it, we want to do something about it if we can't stop it. So, and yeah, Indonesia committed to buying Boeing aircraft. Who wants that, right? And imports of U.S. agriculture. Guess what that is, right? Okay, good. Glad you guys can hear me. What we were talking about last week, the soybeans that China's not buying anymore. So guess who's buying those soybeans? Indonesia. Okay. And then it's just like the oil thing too, right? The how Europe was like, we're not going to buy your oil, whatever. We're not allowed to buy your oil, so we're not actually doing that. We're following our own rules, aren't we? We're going to buy your oil from India. You're still buying Russian oil, right? So what do you think if China needs more soybeans? What do you think they're going to do? They're going to buy them from Indonesia. And as I talked about with Indonesia's currency, whatever, the big players benefit from this farcical little game that everyone believes, wherever the big players are this big at war with each other, right? But it's China can buy the whatever products from Indonesia like at a steal because Indonesia's currency is a piece of shit, right? And yes, they're doing the right thing by joining BRICS to try and de-dollarize, to actually fix that problem so their currency can be what it should be. Because a country like Indonesia should not have a currency that's through the floor. They have a massive population. They've got lots of very important resources they should have a powerful economy. But like a lot of countries, like the Congo, a place with a powerful economy is a place that the Americans need to destroy. So I'm getting a little bit distracted here. So I'm going to go back to, I think that was enough making my point there with that. Going to go back to this original article. Hope you remember One Piece, wherever the Jolly Roger flag. So the movement gained momentum when the authorities responded with strong criticism of the flag's use, inadvertently drawing more attention to the symbol. The government officials characterized the displays as a threat to national unity or a threat to the compradors in power, okay, the sellouts of the nation, while protesters viewed them as legitimate expressions of political frustration. Why the flag travels. The speed with which the one-piece Jolly Roger flag spread across borders reflects the digital upbringing of Gen Z. This is the first cohort to grow up fully online, immersed in memes, anime, and global entertainment franchises. Yeah, not exactly a good thing to be terribly proud of. It's the first massive experiment on a population like this to fill their head with all of this stuff, and we'll see what happens. So I know it's not popular to be a Luddite and be all like, stay away from technology, everyone. But maybe try and stay away from technology because, like, everything is developing way too fast. For the human evolution, all of this is too fast for us to be able to adapt to in time. We need to slow the rollout of this tech, okay? So that we can, like, adapt to it in a way that is not maladaptive, okay? There's nothing unreasonable about that. There's nothing backward reactionary about that. If you want to really be progressive or whatever, or revolutionary, you can't just encourage technocratic dystopia and think that it's going to accomplish anything else. So this is their political communication relies on what scholars call networked publics, communities that form and act through digital platforms rather than formal organizations. And this here, I feel like we're a little bit guilty ourselves here, because how are we trying to organize ourselves? What are we doing on this channel even? We're saying join our Discord, the same Discord that they're apparently using to overthrow Nepal and in Indonesia and Madagascar, right? So that's a massive operational weakness. It's a huge flaw that we need to eliminate if we really want to, like, if we don't want to just pat ourselves on the back and tell ourselves that, like, we care, so we're the good guys. Like, caring isn't enough, right? We need to actually have disciplined organizations, right? Formal organizations. I understand there's a lot of fatigue with the parties because of all this infighting and all this the splitting and the lack of public support for socialist parties and whatnot, and it makes it extremely difficult to formally organize. But without the structure of the formal party to to help us, like, maintain some dual power, I think we are a little bit too vulnerable to. We're going to try and have such a decentralized movement that it will end up being centralized by, like, covertly, and no one will even know because we're convinced that we're just part of a networked public, right? But that seems like a golden opportunity that the CIA and all of their fellow agencies around the world will be salivating to pull the strings of us on with these platforms. Like, we really got to get off Twitter and shit like that. It's not even good for us mentally, and it doesn't, like, there's so much work that we have to put into getting through all the misinformation to actually get useful information. It's not worth our time. What we need to do, not just political formal organizations, we need our own economic organizations, whether they're guilds or whether they're businesses. Like, we need cooperatives and whatnot. If we can have our own digital platforms that we socialists own and operate, controlling our own means of production, I feel like even if we're not having a big market share and actually competing with the YouTube and shit, whatever, that we would still have created our own space, and that we will not, the censorship and shit. We would have a step in the right direction, right? But that's only the beginning. But anyway, what's up, antediluvian atheist? Always good to see you. Welcome. Hopefully, we can have you and Abby on when you guys are available to discuss what we were talking about a couple weeks ago or whatever. I really would like to have that a dialectic with you about this China Maoism. I'm touching on it a little bit today. Where there's a lot to go through with the history and everything about why didn't China support some of these other revolutionary countries, And the answer is complicated. Like, it's not just so simple as to say, well, they made a mistake. They should have supported any revolutionary or, like, anywhere, because, like, this infiltration and everything. And so we have to, like, those who know who's the more trustworthy side and why, it's a little bit incumbent on you guys to try and help us people like me and Abby who are trying to learn to teach and help, like, but we can't. We'll end up doing more harm than good if we learn the wrong thing and teach the wrong thing. So, how's it going, Mouse? Good to see you. Let me get back to my article here. So, solidarity in this setting does not require party membership or ideology. Instead, it depends on shared cultural references. It's a way to, I think, this is one of the ways that we're being cognitively captured. We're being steered away from class consciousness because we're not trying to orient ourselves, our identities, in a way that's more based on ideology. If we're, the corporate algorithms and everything are getting us to identify based on our cultural references and our gender politics and whatnot, as opposed to our class consciousness and analysis. That's kind of how it happens. So a meme, gesture, or flag can instantly carry meaning across divides of language, religion, or geography. That much is true. This form of connection is built on recognizable cultural codes that allow young people to identify with each other, even when their political systems differ. So there may be something good here in that we need to break uh, the deadlock, the impasse politically that we've come to. If you're being dialectic about stuff, you like this kind of new blood, whatever, this something um, that can help people bridge divides like that would be important for us to try to utilize too. But we have to recognize how, if it's useful, if we can use recognizable cultural codes to build up class consciousness, those who prefer nialectics over dialectics can use the exact same levers to de-radicalize people and to blind their class consciousness. So social media gives this solidarity reach and speed. Videos of Indonesians waving the flag were clipped and reshared on TikTok and Instagram, reaching audiences far beyond their original context. And how is this possible, might I ask? Because we, in the independent media, trying to actually produce our own content, we find we have a very difficult time actually getting our message out there. How do you get something to be shared if it's being throttled? So I there's no way that like these companies would have shut down if it was a threat to the system to topple governments that they didn't want toppled. They would have shut down this shit right away. So if they let you overthrow your government, maybe you should recognize that they let you. What does that mean? Because as much as they control stuff or whatever, they don't control everything. That's the other thing. Like, we have to really figure out who are they, whose puppet strings are being pulled or whatever, but aren't like being held like like permanently, right? Like someone like Charlie Kirk, or whatever, his strings were completely controlled, hands down, like permanent, no matter what. But there are some actors, like, they only manage to manipulate them, just steer them in the right direction, just to create a collision, right? Something like that. So, like the patsies, whatever. There's a difference in the way that people's strings are pulled. So, um, let me get back to this. Oh. Hmm. Yeah, you guys probably going to be talking about some interesting stuff. I'll have to try and catch up with the chat later or whatever. By myself, it's hard to split my attention like that. So, but feel free, carry on. So, by the time the symbol appeared in Kathmandu, the Nepalese capital, in September, it already carried the aura of youthful defiance. Crucially, this was not simple imitation. In Nepal, the flag was tied to anger at youth unemployment and at the ostentatious wealth of political dynasties. You be quiet, Bella. Hey! Okay, can you hear me? This is weird now. I got two of me. What's going on? Okay, I think it's fixed. I just had to back in and out of the studio because StreamYard likes to do that. But now I've lost my. Okay, good. Now I just gotta find a way to get my article back up here. I don't know what the hell's going on. I'll probably have to. Oh, there we go. Reshare my screen here. Yeah, sorry about that. There, my neighbor and his friend came down to maybe see what I was up to, not realizing I was live streaming. So hopefully we'll be able to hang out later. But it's all good. Where is that? Where is it? Where was I sharing? Here we go. All right. Okay. Sorry. Here we go. So crucially, this was not simple imitation. The flag in Nepal was tied to anger at youth unemployment, to the ostentatious wealth of political dynasties displayed online. In Indonesia, it reflected disillusionment with patriotic rituals that felt hollow against a backdrop of corruption. In both cases, the Jolly Roger flag worked like open source code, adaptable locally, but instantly legible elsewhere. That sounds kind of like CIA false flag op language if I've ever seen it, you know. Part of the flag's effectiveness comes from its ambiguity. Unlike a party logo, the one piece Jolly Roger flag originates in popular culture, which makes it difficult for governments to suppress without appearing authoritarian. During the latest protest in Indonesia, authorities confiscated banners and labeled them treasonous. But such crackdowns only amplified public frustration. Well, I mean, it is like a pirate flag. It's a little bit on the nose, you know what I mean? It's certainly not a huge patriotic symbol, if you ask me. But that's the whole point. So, fiction as reality. The One Piece flag is not alone in being reimagined as a symbol of resistance. Across movements worldwide, pop culture and digital culture have become a potent resource. Apotent resources have become potent resources for activists. In Chile and Beirut, demonstrators wore Joker masks as a visual shorthand for anger at corruption and inequality. Another massive billionaire enterprise, right? Those Joker Batman movies. Batman, by the way, is not a working class hero, billionaire superhero guy, you know. In Thailand, demonstrators turned to Hamtaro, a children's anime about a hamster, parodying its theme song and waving plush toys to lampoon political leaders. This blending of politics, entertainment, and personal identity reflects a hybrid media environment in which symbols drawn from fandom gain power. They are easy to recognize, adapt, and defend against state repression. Yet cultural resonance alone does not explain the appeal. That's right. That's a good cultural resonance alone does not explain the appeal. The One Piece flag caught on because it captured real life grievances. You could say that, but I'm gonna contend that is not adequate of an explanation. I mean, it potentially does capture real life grievances for some who relate to the flag, but I think it's more likely to catch on because it's a useful tool to control movements. So in Nepal, where youth unemployment exceeds 20% and migration for work is common, protesters paired the emblem with slogans such as Gen Z won't be silent and our future is not for sale. And those slogans are not terribly class conscious. I mean, our future is not for sale is getting there, but it's not like the slogans of old that were explicitly class conscious, you know. This is more identity politics kind of potentially neoliberal kind of thing. Um, In Indonesia, some protesters argued that the national flag was too sacred to be flown in a corrupt system, using the pirate banner as a statement of disillusionment. The spread of the flag also reflects a broader shift in how protest ideas move across borders. In the past, what tended to travel were tactics such as sit-ins, marches, or hunger strikes. Today, what circulates fastest are symbols, visual references from global culture that can be adapted to local struggles, while remaining instantly recognizable elsewhere. So it's a lot like how the shift to crypto and everything, like things are becoming less real. You know what I mean? Like things are circulating faster because they're more digital, because they're more virtual, because they're not as real as they used to be. But that's, I don't know, that might be some bias about uh, what I'm perceiving about where we're at. So the flag goes global. The flag's journey from Asian streets to protests in France and Slovakia demonstrates how the grammar of dissent has gone global. For today's young activists, culture and politics are inseparable. Digital nativity has produced a generation that communicates grievances through memes, symbols, and cultural references that cross borders with ease. This is like the not quite like old enough to be serious enough kind of revolutionary character. That's, I don't know. When protesters in Jakarta, Kathmandu, or Manila wave the One Piece Jolly Roger flag, they are not indulging in play acting. So, yeah, but transforming a cultural icon into a living emblem of defiance. Doesn't that sound just peachy? Um, so let me check in with you guys. I might be a little bit too like jaded, with what's been going on to be able to relate to the youth these days. I'm a little too antisocial with my personality to be able to have such revolutionary optimism for stuff like this. But um, I don't know. Hopefully, I'm like at least making some kind of point that's valuable here. So let me see what article to move to next. I think I wanted to talk a bit about the way that the technology is really kind of having an impact, because that's the thing. People, it's like a drug, right? Like people praise the technology because all the power that it gives people, but it's also the fact that it's powerful is exactly why it's so addictive. And if it's powerful and addictive, it's also probably bad for you. So while these tools that we are attracted to try and achieve a revolution might be tempting, not to be religious about it, but we want to be cautious about embracing this technology that's going to destroy our minds, just like you would be cautious about touching something like fentanyl because it's for the exact same reason. So sorry, I gotta find the right article here. Just give me a moment, because I get stressed out when I'm by myself, and I just like, oh, it's taking too long to find something, so I better just start talking about something. Um, yeah, there we go. But I want to kind of try and go in the right direction because I could accidentally just talk about end up in the wrong rabbit hole where there's not so much juicy fruit. So let me just see what you guys are saying. So Sean, we're saying, so is it a color revolution or like which one? Right, we're talking to like a whole bunch. Some of them haven't really made it to the stage of actual revolution yet. Like Indonesia, those protests are basically like over. It seems like government crackdown took place. They didn't really have the momentum to change things as of yet, but that doesn't mean it's not going to boil over by the end of the year or into next year. Or Madagascar's government is down, and that one's not coming back up. So that was successful. Whatever. Uh, I think that in Madagascar, it seems like it might be not so much of a color revolution because the president was trying to kind of cozy up with France, and there's like a colonial territorial dispute. When Madagascar gained their independence, France retained a couple of islands just to fucking like screw them up and not let them actually have control over the very important trade route that's right there. And so when we're talking about moves to monkey wrench the BRICS moves for de-dollarization, wherever South Africa is one of those members, and having a coup happen in Madagascar would likely be, and Kenya too. Those are kind of, I think, the reason why they'd be targeted there is because of that sea route that's extremely important around the Cape of Africa. So, but I think that because that president was trying to make whatever deals with France and stuff, and talk his country into, oh, we still need these French, don't worry, whatever. When everyone around in Africa and stuff is throwing off the French, and now's the time to get rid of them if ever there was a time. And you got a president who's like, no, we still need these guys, or whatever. So I'm not entirely ready to sort of declare that it was a real revolution because there's too many times where you got like, because we're hoping we're vulnerable because we hope finally these people are actually really overthrowing them for real, and so we can't let our hopes get us ahead of ourselves. So there's another one in Morocco. To me, that one does not seem like a real revolution unless they get rid of the king. And what they have not been doing is actually pointing their complaints at the king. They're trying to complain about the president or whatever, right? Who, like in England and in Canada, takes their orders from the king. So if you really want to change things, go after the king. Okay. The reason why you don't want to go after the king is because of the long history of bloodshed of what happens to people who go after the king, right? And so we got to talk about the history of all these countries to really actually understand if it's a color revolution or not. But I'm going to try and make a connection because I found that all of this goes back to the 1960s. Okay, these specific countries that these are happening in, the reason why there might be a connection, a natural, organic, revolutionary connection between these movements and not just a color revolution all over the world, would be their revolutionary solidarity that would have began in the 1960s because of, like I was saying, about Maoism and maybe even some Trotskyism and stuff, whatever. There was the Stalinist camp in the Cold War, and then there was the other socialists that a lot of us never learned about and are having a hard time learning about because we have to teach ourselves about what the fuck happened. Because in order to learn about what happened, you either go to the Marxist-Leninists about these other more sectarian kinds of communists, and you get their version of what they are. So then you have to go to the other group and see what do they say because it's reverse, wherever a lot of the Maoists, whatever, would say, oh, China's state capitalist now, or whatever, right? So there's contradictions there that we need to resolve, but it's very confusing unless you've done enough research. So, and I'm still not done enough research, so I'll get there though. So let me see. Let me get to this article now. So this one is from greatergoodberkeley.edu. So a much more change of pace, whatever, not so political, but psychological article. So how teens today are different from past generations. This was all the way back in 2017. So this article might be too outdated, but I don't know. I thought that there was some relevant points made in this. I guess this article was written so long ago that they hadn't settled on the term Gen Zer, because she's calling Gen Z's iGens in this article, which is a terrible name, but whatever. So a psychologist mines big data on teens and finds many ways this generation, the iGens, is different from boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials. Every generation of teens is shaped by the social, political, and economic events of the day. Today's teenagers are no different, and they're the first generation whose lives are saturated by mobile technology and social media. In her new book, psychologist Jean Twenge uses large-scale surveys to draw a detailed portrait of 10 qualities that make today's teens unique and the cultural forces shaping them. Probably going to need a grain of salt on this type of research because I don't think you want to talk about rigorous academic kind of uh, hard data that you can use to make hard conclusions. I'm not sure that this kind of psychological research can really do that. So it might just be more like soft science, which, but who wants to play with the soft science? Everybody wants it hard. So her findings are by turn alarming, informative, surprising, and insightful, making the book iGen, Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood, sure, and what that means for the rest of us. An important read for anyone interested in teens' lives. Who are the Gen Zers? Twenge names the generation born between 1995 and 2012 iGens for their ubiquitous use of the iPhone, their valuing of individualism, their economic context of income inequality, their inclusiveness, and more. She identifies their unique qualities by analyzing 4 nationally representative surveys of 11 million teens since the 1960s. Those surveys, which have asked the same questions, and some new ones, of teens year after year, allow comparisons among boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, and iGens at exactly the same ages. In addition to identifying cross-generational trends in these surveys, Twenge tests her inferences against her own follow-up surveys, interviews with teens, and findings from smaller experimental studies. Here are just a few of her conclusions. Gen Zers have poor emotional health thanks to new media. Twenge finds that new media is making teens more lonely, anxious, and depressed, and is undermining their social skills and even their sleep. Now, those of you with children might have to try and give us a little bit of anecdotal uh, confirmation bias, or maybe like we all can see based on our varying experiences that some of this appears to at least be true for us with our family, our kids. I'm not sure if my kids would you say that they're more lonely yet, right? They might be getting there one day if they don't get off the screen. You know what I mean? And I know I'm on a screen as we speak, so that always comes across as hypocritical. But I myself am trying not to be on the screen as much because I find myself more lonely, anxious, and depressed, and my social skills undermined. But what I try and do with my time on the screen is more educational, informative, as opposed to entertainment, mind numbing, whatever, brainwashing. That's maybe what I'm telling myself, whatever. I do think that that's the way to go if you can't get off the screen because you're still addicted to it too much. Try and do that, whatever. Try and make your activities on the screen more productive as opposed to um, just wasting time having fun, right? Because that's just escapism at the end of the day. And it becomes harder and harder to enjoy yourself because you need to escape deeper and deeper in order to have the same kind of level of enjoyment. So try to think of your devices as just as addictive as cigarettes, please, because I think that's the way to go. So, thank you, Rondo. I appreciate you. Okay. So, and for the love of God, get some sleep, okay? That's so good for you. Anyway, Gen Zs grew up with cell phones, had an Instagram page before they started high school. Not my kids, thank God. And do not remember a time before the internet, writes Twenge. They spend 5 to 6 hours a day texting, chatting, gaming, web surfing, streaming, and sharing videos, and hanging out online. Yeah, my kids do that, and that's not a good thing. So, while other observers have equivocated about the impact, Twenge is clear. More than 2 hours a day raises the risk for serious mental health problems. But then again, trying to be a little devil's advocate, if we're not able to spend some days more than 2 hours a day online, whatever, how are we supposed to organize, right? because that's what, like, you try to take the advice, the mental health advice for this seriously, then you end up having to live like a hermit, and like other people don't necessarily have time to spend time offline. So we're getting to some difficult choices here, and like lose kind of choices. So how's it going, John Kemper? Thanks for popping in. Good to see you. Yeah, Abby's not here tonight. She had family crisis, but no worries. I'll just try and do what I can, right? I know I get a little bit bookish. I always tended to be reading articles without her, but my computer's fucked and I don't know. I'm too stupid. So this is where those of us who are too stupid to use the technology or whatever is a blessing in disguise in some cases, whatever, because we can't really be as severely impacted by this technology because like we can't even use it. And that's because it sucks, right? If the capitalist innovation were so effective, or a lot of us would be able to use these things wherever, but because this technology sucks and we don't know how to make it work, whatever, then now it can't like manipulate us as badly. So, but that's not anyway, not a good trade-off. So she draws these conclusions by showing how the national rise in teen mental health problems mirrors the market penetration of iPhones, both take an upswing around 2012. And that's the kind of thing, a more of a hard statistic that I think is very worth like taking note of. Let me see if I got the actual graph here. I think it's here. Because we got these like hockey stick graphs. This is the scary thing about living in the 2000s, the 2020s. Every graph of our time is this fucking shape. Why are we living through a hockey stick? No matter what kind of data that we're looking at, why is everything a fucking hockey stick? Okay, fuck off. Anyway, because it's not a good, like, this is what crisis looks like when things become detached from reality. They get unhinged or whatever. They go to the moon, whatever. But we need to be grounded. We can't have line go up all time. Okay, doesn't work that way. So this is fiber use penetration, and then self-harm in boys way down here. Interesting. I'm not sure what that's all about, except only thing that comes to mind right away is patriarchy, right? Why the fuck would girls be way more harmed by social media and the rise of like the digital economy and everything than boys? Whoa, what's going on here? Oh, I don't know. It must be the fucking patriarchy is a real big thing and a real problem. For those of you who think, oh, it's not even real, just leftist woke nonsense. The data kind of begs to differ. Okay, so because yeah, like OnlyFans, right? This kind of thing, targeting boys or girls, right? So you think that the tech is going to be so liberatory? In some cases, that's exactly what, like, if you know how to use it or whatever, the exception to the rule is that this tech can be liberatory if used correctly. But the majority of the time, it is shackling, the opposite of liberating. So careful, right? Pick your poison. So, but back to the other article, because this is scary for those of us with kids, right? We're just like, what can I do to protect my kids from this? And it's like, it's already too late in some cases. Like, if in their minds they're believing that this tech is not as dangerous as, like, daddy just likes to be paranoid. He likes to rant and rave about stuff, but he doesn't really know what he's talking about. You know, it's like, well, you know what? Sometimes I do kind of at least have a bit of a good point, right? So, and a lot of the stuff that if I ever, like, I stand on the shoulders of giants, like everyone says, right? Like, if I'm right about something, it's usually just because I looked into something that somebody else was already right about, and I just acknowledge that they're right about it, right? Like, but that's what we have to do, right? You gotta support people who are correct about things, not just act like whatever the postmodernists are correct, whatever, and that you're right about it, but who cares, whatever. You don't have power. So it's back to this article. So the teen mental health problems mirrors the market penetration of iPhones. Cliodynamic clout right there. So this is correlational data, but competing explanations like rising academic pressure or the Great Recession don't seem to explain teens' mental health issues. And this is where if the people who write these articles and do this research, if they lack class consciousness, if they don't literally put it into their analysis when they do their research, you're going to come up with competing explanations that are not quite adequately explaining. Like the model doesn't approach reality because it requires the input of class consciousness, right? So, but I think, but if we get to the end of the article, you can see how they're trying not to be political, but they do kind of like it's the crossroads that psychology is at right now. It's actually really interesting where psychology can either radicalize and embrace like there's a lot of the revolutionary rhetoric that people have been using for the good of collective psychology, or it can condemn the revolutionary rhetoric and reinforce the capitalist dystopia and try and argue that a healthy psychology is one that doesn't really buy into the groupthink and all that stuff. So it'll be very interesting to see which side of history the psychologists will be on. But typically, when you take the class analysis seriously, you recognize which side have they historically been on, right? Academia is a little too bourgeois for their own good, right? They're a little too pampered, a little too well paid for what? What are they doing for us? Fucking gaslighting us half the time. So thanks, but no thanks. This is correlational data, caveat. But competing explanations like rising academic pressure, don't seamlessly. I already read that. Excuse me. An experimental study suggests that when teens give up Facebook for a period or spend time in nature without their phones, for example, they become happier. That's probably very true, but it's something. I was off Facebook for a long time. I used to be on it in high school. I got off of it for like 8 years or 10 years or some shit, whatever. And I came back because I was happier for a time, but then not being on the social media that everyone else was on, it did have an isolating effect, okay? Being too much of a Luddite, right? So I did feel like I needed to come back to the social media, but guess what? Didn't make me happier. So there's a lot of truth to this. Getting away from the corporate controlled social media will make you happier, obviously, for obvious reasons. So the mental health consequences are especially acute for younger teens, she writes. This makes sense developmentally since the onset of puberty triggers a cascade of changes in the brain that make teens more emotional and more sensitive to their social world, which we all already knew. So, of course, put two and two together, teens are the most likely to be like the most into this technology, but they're also maybe one of the segments of the population who's most vulnerable to it. So, catch-22. Social media use, Twenge explains, means teens are spending less time with their friends in person. At the same time, online content creates unrealistic expectations about happiness, body image, and more opportunities for feeling left out, which scientists now know has similar effects as physical pain, which I didn't know that. That sounds interesting. Girls may be especially vulnerable since they use social media more, report feeling left out more often than boys, and report twice the rate of cyberbullying as boys do. So that's where when we want to talk about our reproduction crisis, and people want to go blaming whatever, we gotta get rid of this woke whatever trans ideology. You can't let all these kids become trans or we're not going to have enough babies to go around anymore, guys. That has nothing to do with the reproduction crisis. This is the problem of the reproduction crisis, right? The technology makes it so that we don't really feel like we need other human beings anymore because we're getting what we think we need from the device. We're simulating the connection with real people. There are real people on the screen, right? We got a connection with them, right? But it's like illusory, ephemeral, whatever. It's not real. It's kind of real. We got connections with you guys, right? You and like what we're doing is should be pointed out. It's a little bit different. We are a little bit more connected with each other because of like the nature of like what we're trying to do. Like we're politically active with our show as opposed to just some video game stream, right? Yeah, that's right, Sean. Parasocial. So while it's not good to have only parasocial friends, and like that's just because we're like trying to be political about our antisocial behavior or whatever, that doesn't make it better, right? But um, we are trying to overcome these problems with our organizing online, and a lot of people are just their community is like a sports team thing, and it does nothing to actually improve the situation. So, and we have to have like a critical thinking, and if what we're doing online here is not working over the next 5-10 years, whatever, we're gonna have to make that decision to get the fuck off, right? Just find something other way to go about things, because the point about trying to organize online is like if we can achieve a critical mass and then get offline, whatever, then we will have used the technology in a way that was beneficial. But if that doesn't work and we end up just trying to get caught in a sunk cost fallacy where it's just around the corner where we're going to get that boom of followers and supporters, whatever, and then we can find a way to organize offline, whatever. We got to learn to call it quits when we're gambling. You know what I mean? So here we go. Back to the article. Social media is creating an epidemic of anguish, Twenge says. Yeah, but let's just like point the finger where it belongs or whatever. Capitalism is creating an epidemic of anguish because those social media companies are run by billionaire capitalists who have no intention of using their technology responsibly. So you get what you pay for. So Gen Z grow up more slowly. This is an interesting thing. I think a lot of people have been pointing this out anecdotally too. None of these kids are prepared for real life. And this, I would have to say, is actually a huge consequence of the imperialism, okay? The white supremacism. How I know people will, how the hell are you making that connection, whatever? You're just saying whatever the fuck you want to say, right? Hear me out, okay? The reason why kids grow up more slowly in the imperial core is because all the danger and the violence has been outsourced to the third world and like that kind of thing. So kids are growing up softer and more slowly. They're not really maturing properly because you kind of made things too easy for them, because you're sapping the life force of other people in other countries and whatnot, so we can live high on the hog, right? Live the high life. And that, what does that do? Like, it seems like something that you want for your kids, right? But what does it do for them physically and mentally? It makes them weak, right? Hedonism makes us weak, okay? When we just, whatever, throw out all the things, the discipline that matters, right? And we try and just live the good life. What that ends up doing is it destroys our integrity, and then we can't be mature. We can't do the right thing in the moment. We can't meet the moment, right? Because we have shielded our kids from too much, right? That's like that lawnmower parent and whatnot. The gated community people. Are their kids better off for that? Are they stronger people, or are they a bunch of fucking snowflake pussies because they've never actually been in a fight? You know what I mean? So I understand we don't want to encourage abusive parents like, oh, my kid's not going to be prepared for the world unless I punch him in the face. Obviously, that's not what I'm fucking saying, right? But I hope people hear what I'm saying and agree with it, that if you are too soft on your kids, you will have fucked over them for the future, because they are not going to recover from that easily. So you do need to try and be tough enough, the tough love or whatever in the right context. There's some validity to that, I think, right? As long as it doesn't get across the line into that abusive, I think I'm doing what I need to because I love you and because you need it, right? But at the end of the day, you're just kind of oppressing your own children. So this stuff is not easy. That's why we need to give parents whatever the resources to actually be good parents instead of making it impossible for them to accomplish raising kids properly, and then you go blame them because they didn't pull hard enough on their bootstraps. Get the fuck out of here, okay? So, how's it going, Cowboy Kitty? Good to see you. Okay, moving on. Twenge floats a fascinating hypothesis to explain this. Oh, growing up more slowly. Sorry. The Gen Zers also appear more reluctant to grow up, or whatever. Well, that has everything to do with all that climate change nonsense, or whatever. Like, would you want to fucking grow up when you see how awful things are about, like, unless everyone's lying about everything, in which case things are pretty fucking awful because everybody lies about everything. How are you supposed to make sense of the world if no one told you the truth? What the fuck are you supposed to believe? And if the people are telling us the truth, then what we're supposed to believe is that the global warming and stuff, or whatever, we're already cooked or whatever, right? There's like a really serious panic that our younger generations are facing. Like we don't have the luxury of panicking, but we don't have really any options because none of the preparatory work to avoid going off the cliff is being done. So what the fuck are you supposed to do except for panic? So they are more likely than previous generations to hang out with their parents, postpone sex, and decline driver's licenses. All very interesting, whatever. Go ahead and talk shit about incels, right? But let's not do anything to correct the systemic problems that are creating a mass epidemic of incels, right? Always more fun to just punch down and be ableist, right? So, Twenge floats a fascinating hypothesis to explain this, one that is well known in social science, but seldom discussed outside academia. Life history theory argues that how fast teens grow up depends on their perceptions of their environment. When the environment is perceived as hostile and competitive, teens take a fast life strategy, growing up quickly, making larger families earlier, focusing on survival. A slow life strategy, in contrast, occurs in safer environments and allows a greater investment in fewer children, more time for preschool soccer and kindergarten violin lessons. So, what is really important about this when we're looking in the context of the youth protests and coup d'etats around the world and whatnot? The fast life strategy of growing up in the global south, right? Where you're expected to remain colonized forever. So, what does that have? What effect does that have to do on the psychology of the Gen Z in the other parts of the world? Is they're going to be very different than the Gen Z in the West that's been coddled, who will live this slow life strategy. This is why people have no faith in Western leftists at all. It's not really like, but you could say it's our fault, but that's probably not really very accurate or honest. I would say that the initial conditions that we grew up with have seriously inhibited our ability to, even if we know what needs to be done and we want to do it, we've been kind of screwed based on our upbringing. So we have a massive uphill battle, but everyone thinks that because we grew up in the imperial core, we got so many more resources, whatever. It's more about trying to keep our edge over the rest of the world. For those of us who want nothing to do with keeping that edge over the rest of the world, whatever, that's not the reason why we're having a hard time being revolutionary. The reason why is because of this indoctrination that we have to unlearn, right? This destruction of our mind, whatever. We have to decolonize our mind. That's what people like to say, right? Well, that's very real. That's a seriously difficult thing to do. So give people grace, but then don't have false hope, right? Yeah, Cowboy Kitty saying the kids are protesting genocide. They'll be all right. Yeah, those ones, the ones that know what's up. Yeah. Some kids, though, I'm having a hard time having a lot of faith in the young generation when we got people like this Harry Cison and Charlie Kirk or whatever, and all these younger people that are like lapping that shit up. Those kids are not going to be okay. They got to get off that fucking crack. So, um, Sean's saying, remember that humans, for the most part, just live a life. They don't pay attention to anything other than their immediate area. Yeah, and there really isn't anything wrong with that. It's not like we need to be excessively critical of that. It's just that capitalism imposes on us to have to rise above, choose not to choose the path of least resistance in a way, right? We only pay attention to things that affect us because, like, evolutionarily or whatever, it doesn't make sense to spend extra energy and resources paying attention to things that don't necessarily concern us. That's something you do that's more of a luxury, right? So if you don't have time to pay attention to everyone else, it's not like you're guilty, but capitalism has forced us all into a contradiction where the less that we pay attention, the worse it gets. But the less that we pay attention, the more that we are aware that our lack of paying attention is part of the problem. So once we become aware that paying attention makes a big difference and not paying attention is a big problem, it becomes a personal responsibility to do our best to not just live our life, but then you've whatever become activated, you've drunk the Kool-Aid or whatever. Now you have to live your life for a purpose and you can't just be a drifter. So too bad. Sometimes you got to wake up. So you're saying, no, Kitty, no, I support your message. I'm basically telling Nilo that none have gotten it right. So panic is not needed, but observation and understanding is. Yeah, I probably missed some of your comment, but yeah, panic is not needed. It's never really needed. It's not a good thing, but I'm saying it is where you get to if the things that need to happen to not get stuck into panic doesn't happen. And I think that they want us to panic. So that's partly why we're all hoping against hope that the worst people have some tiny grain of consciousness or whatever, that they really do care somehow about the people running the country want to care a little bit about the country somehow. But that's like, I don't know, wishful thinking, right? So because really they want us to panic because we're much more useful, easily manipulated when we're panicking, right? So that's that human nature. I feel like the biggest argument that the capitalists have in their favor is the human nature argument, but it's not. I'm not trying to validate that. I'm saying we need to recognize that it is our human nature that is the like that's like our most vulnerable thing that the capitalists have been manipulating to keep us trapped, and so we have to learn how to harness our human nature better than they have been harnessing our own human nature against us or whatever. So yeah, let me move back on to the article here. See, some of these statements I feel are just ridiculous. Like, youths of every racial group, region, and class are growing up more slowly. Tell that to the fucking Palestinians. So, a phenomenon she neither champions nor judges. However, employers and college administrators have complained about today's teens' lack of preparation for adulthood. Nobody wants to work anymore. In her popular book, How to Raise an Adult, Julie Lithcott-Hames writes that students entering college have been overparented and as a result are timid about exploration, afraid to make mistakes, and unable to advocate for themselves. That is true for some, but there's also a lot of, like, the problem of anomie, if you ever heard that word, ANOMIE. I've always thought growing up that there was that was a big problem too, where there's a lot of underparenting going around. A lot of people haven't been taught anything that they need to know. Like, that's one of the massive problems about trying to educate people about communism, where nobody's fucking heard about it because their parents didn't really parent them, I would say, whatever. Sometimes they, or their parental figures, whatever, their teachers and whatnot, they didn't responsibly tell them about things that they like need to know in a way, because that's somebody else's responsibility. It's always somebody else's job. So I don't know. We can only speak what experiences we have. So, and if you're going to do psychological research, there's a collective psychology research, whatever, you have to be very careful not to be doing broad brushes. So there's only so much value to the psychology at the end of the day. So, because it's the big thing about psychology is you have to have a materialist psychology, because if you don't have enough respect for materialism when you try and apply your psychological theories, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of idealistic bullshit. So yeah. Twenge suggests that the reality is more complicated. Today's teens are legitimately closer to their parents than previous generations. It's like, how can you just say that when there's so many people have really bad, complicated relationships with their parents and whatnot? So, but anyway, but I keep interrupting this article. I just need to fucking finish reading it, or at least I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's too long, right? I didn't really mean to spend so much time focusing on just these one or two articles, whatever. I got a point about 1960 I got to make, so I got to move on. So Twenge suggests that the reality is more complicated. Today's teens are legitimately closer to their parents, but their life course has also been shaped by income inequality that demoralizes their hopes for the future. So it's like, finally they start to touch on the class consciousness or whatever, but they don't really know how to talk about it. So that's basically why they aren't even touching on it. That's my guess. So compared to previous generations, Gen Zers believe they have less control over how their lives turn out. Instead, they think that the system is already rigged against them, because it is, a dispiriting finding about a segment of the lifespan that is designed for creatively reimagining the future. And Gen Zers exhibit more care for others. They have more empathy. So good, right? More than other generations, Gen Zers are respectful and inclusive of diversity of many kinds. Yet as a result, they reject offensive speech more than any earlier generation, and they are derided for their fragility and need for trigger warnings and safe spaces. I've seen this definitely a lot. A lot of people are like, oh, you people with your safe spaces, you stupid, whatever, infantile leftists, how dare you try and make people be nice to each other. That's so useless. Why the fuck would we want to be nice to our own comrades? That would be such an undermining of our revolution. We have to be so tough and hard on each other that we fucking hurt each other's feelings to the point where we cannot tell the difference between abusive bullying, whatever, and fucking joking and shit like that. So this is just I found that it's kind of an interesting observation, though, that this lady is making. How the counterintuitive consequence of like being more respectful and inclusive makes us more reactionary or whatever, like psychologically, to offensive speech and stuff, which might make us more prone to censorship. It's interesting. That's the kind of connection that maybe people wouldn't have thought would be there, but there might be something to that. And like that would be where the gaslighting response that we get for trying to actually deal with offensive speech and behavior is, well, now you're being offensive with your fragility and your trigger warnings or whatever. You know, my free speech is being impinged on because you need your safe space or whatever, right? So, but that's about the core of why are we trying to create a safe space, is about respect and inclusivity, right? It's not those are not bad values to have, but they become unimportant because whatever subjective reasons. So let me just read this last paragraph and then move on. Today's colleges are tied in knots, trying to reconcile their students' increasing care for others with the importance of having open dialogue about difficult subjects. Disinvitations to campus speakers are at an all-time high. More students believe the First Amendment is outdated, and some faculty have been fired for discussing race in their classrooms. Comedians are steering clear of college campuses. Twenge reports afraid to offend. So this is where whoever was writing this or whatever, her biases are starting to bleed into the article there. So, but what that last paragraph reminds me, I just so happened to watch something last night, just a little Canadian news for you guys, I guess. There's a recent article that the algorithms put in front of me some woman, or like a video on YouTube, this woman just put up a day or two ago. I don't even know who the fuck she was, but she's like some academic from the University of Manitoba or something, or formerly, and she had this big problem with the I forget exactly what it's called or whatever, the missing and murdered Indigenous like children from the residential schools that were there's this like 215 kids allegedly buried at this school in Kamloops, but there's this big controversy about it because they didn't want to disturb the bodies by digging up the graves to find the proof that those kids are actually buried there. So then the white supremacists in Canada, the anti-Indigenous, whatever racism, tries to make it out that these people just want federal funding so that they don't even want to use it, and so they should have to give that money back because their religious beliefs or make them so that they don't want to dig up a body. So what did that remind me of? Of course, fucking Israel Palestine, right? Well, October 7th. What happened to the evidence? Oh, we had to bury it for religious purposes, right? So I found that interesting that there'd be a woman in Canada here trying to like force these Indigenous people to violate their sacred beliefs for scientific whatever purposes. I would love to know if that woman would be willing to fucking have that same standard on the Israelis, because I highly doubt it. I don't even remember what the fucking video was called. I should maybe call it up to show you what I'm talking about. But it was disturbing, highly offensive, because she felt the need to make a public debate about it in front of the university or whatever, and there was like some Indigenous people there that were like really pissed off that she was trying to force this conversation into the public and stuff, because they're not doing the excavations or whatever, so that it's just going to be permanently left at we're not going to find out, even though we could, whatever. So it like both sides get to believe what they want to believe in this situation, right? So it's not really a good resolution, but it's like a catch-22 for the government. If they excavate, they're gonna piss off the Indigenous, or if they don't excavate, they're gonna let the white racists in Canada believe whatever the fuck they want, because they have not done anything to prove their accusations false. So anyway, that's what's going on in Canada, right? They're drumming up this old fucking shit that we've been through already, like years ago. For whatever reason, they're trying to bring it back, right? And I don't think that woman was trying to act like it was for truth and reconciliation is very necessary, but what the consequences of our actions will be to galvanize the far right, basically. So now I'm just kind of talking about some random thing that I'm not even showing you guys. So let me get this fucking off the screen here. And let me find something else to pivot to. So, yeah, here. So let me make my 1960 point, because I thought that was really interesting. Maybe I'm just seeing whatever the fuck I want to see, but I think that there's got to be something more than just color revolution to this, these global fucking globally coordinated protests. This stupid article. It was doing this to me before. It wants to load everything real slow, but I'm just looking for a specific picture. I didn't want to read anything from this article. It just has a map that I found useful. So if I can find it again, where is it? Oh, is that it? There we go. Okay. No, fuck off. I'm trying to show people something. Thank you. Oh, what the fuck? Here we go. All right, there we go. Can we see that? So all these countries are in red, are these A map that shows where Gen Z protests are erupting worldwide. This is from Newsweek. This is from October 3rd, 2020 here. We look at each of these places and we can find a connection to 1960 of all things, right? Except for maybe Serbia or whatever. But Yugoslavia, Tito, the non-aligned movement. There's a lot of some stuff going on here. So let me try and see, where do I start? Sorry, this stuff is, I might be biting off more than I can chew, right? Because my theory here, let me just share this real quick. My theory is that the right-wingers and Trump and them, they want to bring back the 80s. That's the place that, in their minds, that's where the right wing was powerful. And what they want to do with the situation is engineer the return of the 80s, right? The Gilded Age. But what the revolutionaries want is a return to the 1960s, okay? The rise of student activism in the 1960s. And Maoism was also very popular in the 1960s, right? So let me try and find like a better way to... Pardon me. So here, we got the Nepal coup d'etat led by King Mahendra on the 15th of December 1960. Same day he dismissed the cabinet of BP Koirala and imprisoned Koirala. So on 13th of April 1961, Mahendra made a television appearance in which he introduced Panchayat, a partyless political system. So not everything that happened in 1960 is like a good positive development, but it does show that that nation has a really, like, in their cultural memory, 1960 is extremely important, right? So Nepal had a coup d'etat. It was the beginning of a long, oppressive, like 30-year part of their history that was terrible, right? So that was a pivotal moment for their history, right? So then moving over to here, okay, in Peru in the 1960s, the organization of farmers in La Convención Valley of Cusco, beginning locally in 1951 and with the aid of Trotskyite Hugo Blanco starting in 1960, was the most visible of various efforts in rural Peru in the 1950s and 1960s pushing for land reform. The farmers' movement in La Convención, whose principal tactic was to occupy land, was successful only after a period of violent confrontation with landowners, police, and military, and the capture of Blanco and most of his partisans in May 1963. It was the first example of substantial locally organized pressure for agrarian reform. So the revolutionary military government officially ratified this de facto local reform as part of its newly progressive approach to dealing with Peru's problem. This initiative gave an early indication of how the armed forces preferred to deal with issues that became related to internal security. So the peasant success in La Convención inspired many others around the Peruvian highlands to carry out their own land occupations. A large number of them coordinated with the return to elected government in 1963. So this is the only reason why I bring that up is because certain things seem to have happened that are like formative in the cultural memory of the revolutionaries of the land, right? So there's a successful moment in history that they can point to say, look, this is what worked. Let's try that, right? So you go to Kenya here, right? From 1952 to 1960, Kenya saw a major anti-colonial uprising, Mau Mau, defeated only after the massive deployment of British treasure and troops. So this was an unsuccessful anti-colonial uprising that was nonetheless like more, it led to the success in the long term. So sometimes our defeats can be like important parts of the path to victory. So Kenya nevertheless achieved political independence 3 years later, in 1963, led primarily by people who had sat out the emergency or actively collaborated with the colonial state. These two facts meant that the decolonizing state had to face up to questions of post-war justice and reconciliation, okay, a recurring theme, as bottom-up pressure demanded a more just transition that rewarded those who had local contests over the meaning of the conflict and what should happen to the protagonist in the post-colony would greatly influence the shape and future trajectory of Kenya. Just going to skip to the end here. Mau Mau has regained a position of prominence in the national imagination as part of the contemporary Gen Z protests, which have affected the practice of collecting evidence. The paper reflects on the process of conducting oral histories with elderly veterans and ex-loyalists, as well as the archival story of formerly hidden documents, shedding new light on the twilight era of colonialism and the making of the new state which followed. So Gen Z is seeming to pick up, apparently, on the significance of the 1960s. And that's a place for us to look at for for maybe inspiration for what we can do. Let me see if I can find. So there's the Nepal coup d'etat, and then in Morocco, like this is where I'm jumping around a lot because that's the way I do it, right? Sorry, my bad, but hopefully I'm making a useful point. In Morocco, the Years of Lead was a period of the rule of King Hassan II of Morocco from roughly the 1960s to the 1980s, marked by state violence and repression against political dissidents and democracy activists. So these Years of Lead were really fucking serious. I was reading about it, and it's like, from the moment that this king was in power till his death in 1999, his country was in fucking chaos because the people were like, nope, we don't fucking want you. Fuck you. And the monarchy was like, too bad. You guys get to fucking have me no matter what. Whatever, you're stuck with me, right? So, and during the Cold War, these are the countries that the US and the Soviet Union were using as their political footballs. So that's one of the reasons why the monarchy still exists today, is because of the fucking Cold War. So let me find, I think it was this article actually. It was really important because like 1960 specifically is the connection here, right? So this is from the University of Central Arkansas. It says in the pre-crisis phase, or whatever, of 1956, March 2nd, 1956 to October 20, 1958, Morocco formally achieved its independence from France on March 1956. Also, notice 1956 was like the Hungarian Revolution or whatever. So these events have a connection because of the way that people saw what was happening in other parts of the world, and they decided to react based on what they were seeing other nations carrying out at the same time. So Sultan Mohammed V became king of Morocco in August 1957. Ahmed Bala Frej formed a government as prime minister on May 12, 1958. Ali Yatta, the Secretary General of the Communist Party of Morocco, was arrested on October 13, 1958. Then what happened? Several military units and Rif tribesmen began a rebellion in the Tassa region beginning on October 21, 1958. Moulay Abdallah Ibrahim of the Independence Party formed a government as prime minister on December 24, 1958. The National Union of Popular Forces was established by Mahdi Ben Barka in opposition to the government on September 6, 1959. The government suspended the Communist Party of Morocco on September 14, 1959. Government troops suppressed the rebellion in the Tasha region of April 16, 1960. Then the old king dies in 1960, I'm pretty sure. Mohammed died on February 26, 1961. His son was crowned, 1961. And then the country descends into chaos. Okay, long story short, because the communists you should have let the communists have power, whatever, you couldn't let that happen, so there had to be 30 years of blood. Okay, maybe that's just my opinion, whatever. Okay, I don't think so. Indonesia, let's find Indonesia and let's see what happened there in 1960, right? I kind of already told you a little bit, but it's good to kind of actually see, I got too many tabs or whatever now. It's all my eternal problem. So I think it's maybe this will be just a Wikipedia page, but I think this will get the point across, hopefully. Oh, maybe that's the wrong one. Well, maybe not. My bad. But basically, there is an attempted coup in 1965. Oh, I know. Wait, no, that's the Philippines one. Well, maybe I'll go to that though. There was an important speech that the Philippine guy, like there was a deed, or sorry, I'm getting all shitty with my words here because I'm trying to think and I'm live and everything, and you get flustered when it's not going well. This Diosdado Macapagal or whatever, Filipino president, whatever, kind of important. No, this is not the right article either. Shit. Here it is, I think. Yeah, there it is. Okay. So this, I know I'm getting into the weeds or whatever, but there's some interesting stuff when you can kind of get off the beaten path and into the weeds, you know. So this, I don't really have the website this is from because this is like a PDF file or whatever. But decontrol and its effects on the Philippine economy, 1962-1966. So this article is a historical investigation of the decontrol program propagated by the then president Diosdado Macapagal during his term in office from 1962 to 1966. The program was advanced according to its proponents with the end in view of fostering the Philippine economy using the modernization theory as model for economic development. Following the outward-looking economic policy or the export-oriented industrialization, the decontrol program sounds very promising and was considered by Macapagal as the new hope for the common man. However, using the world systems theory as a framework, the study argues that the program was largely an influence of the Americans and other foreign business interests in order to control the Philippine economy. It was designed to serve the interests of the foreign elite groups who have made the local Filipino elite the puppets of the colonial masters. Simply put, the decontrol was an obvious perpetuation of the unbroken foreign hegemony to amass wealth from the country that began from colonization to neo-colonization. So that's all kind of like really jargony, whatever. But basically, long story short, from the 1950s through the 1970s was like considered the Philippines' golden age. It was like economically. After World War II, the Philippines was devastated, but by the early 1950s, the country began to recover, aided by U.S. financial assistance and war reparations from Japan, but also the Philippines had a like Philippine first kind of what do you call it policy. So so in order to protect the economy and everything, like they were valuing the interests of the Filipinos over the foreigners, and that was what created their golden age, whatever, economically. But then, of course, the U.S. came in and encouraged managed to control one of the presidents and got him to, do the IMF thing, like the World Bank thing, whatever, sell your economy out, allegedly in the name of making it the next boom, wherever you create a collapse that was intentional for international investors, but you tell the people that you're doing it for their own good. So the reason why I wanted to, there's a little speech in here. I'm just going to kind of skip all this because I'm getting a little bit not making a very good point the way I'm trying to talk about this. I didn't really not organized enough to make these kinds of points just yet. I gotta get better at doing this. My bad. But so the Filipino First policy, when Carlos Garcia became president of the Philippines following the death of Ramon Magsaysay in 1957, the policy of control and economic protectionism was consistently pursued in order to sustain the economic gains brought about by the control of foreign exchange instituted in 1949. In contrast to most of the Philippines' presidents since independence, Garcia did not represent any large vested sector, local or foreign, and was not beholden to the Americans for his vice presidency, nor for his presidential victory. So he was not captured by the foreign bourgeoisie, apparently, according to this article, and he was not captured by the local bourgeoisie, okay? Not represent any large sector, local or foreign, okay? He had a cooperative relationship with the great nationalist Senator Claro Recto, who was vocal in defending the nationalist aspirations of the Filipino people, and whose preferred economic policy was economic protectionism. A nationalist that he was, Recto said, industrialization and nationalism are twin goals. Indeed, they are two sides of the coin. Nationalism cannot be realized and brought to full flowering without a thoroughgoing industrialization of our economy by the Filipino themselves. This is, to me, is echoing the exact sentiment that the Chinese have and that the supporters of BRICS have, that the nations in the global south, they need to industrialize to realize the potentials of their nations. And that's what they're trying to do in order to accomplish de-dollarization. So that's why I feel this history is relevant, and you cannot have an industrialized Philippine economy controlled and managed by Filipinos without the propulsive force of a deep and abiding spirit of nationalism. I myself, not being as much of I've never really been a hardcore nationalist. So I don't, maybe I'm open to the idea that maybe that this statement is correct as much, but I would say that it can't be without the propulsive force of collectivism, right? That's what I think. That the focus on nationalism, I don't necessarily feel is the most helpful, but in some cases, like that maybe has everything to do with the nation that I belong to, though. If I were born in a nation in the global south there, I would maybe feel a lot more national pride in a country that's like not like Canada has been like a bitch to the American empire, the vassal state, right, for such a long time. How can you be proud of a nation that doesn't do anything in its own interest, right? So, but there's a lot of these countries that are breaking away from the American allegedly sphere of influence, and in those countries, I'm sure it would make a lot more sense to have national pride. So, as an articulation of a truly Filipino economic policy consistent to political independence, President Garcia instituted the Filipino First policy through Resolution number 202 of the National Economic Council on August 28, 1958. Bear with me. I'm just going to try and get down to this speech down here, and then hopefully it will be relevant. This policy was a natural and logical expression of the same concept of the identity of nationalism and industrialization. The phrase meant that the Filipino is first in his own country and that he has priority in anything in his country, particularly in the field of economic endeavor, which affect vitally the security of his life and the stability and progress of his existence. Although some critics dismissed it as merely an instrument for political propaganda, no one could discount the fact that the Filipino should be first in his own land. This is the that's the interesting controversy, the contradiction of like America first or Filipino first, right? It does seem to be mostly an instrument for political propaganda to mobilize the masses, but you can't discount the fact that insert nationality here should be first in insert nation here. So this policy explicitly gave Filipinos preference over non-Filipinos in receiving foreign exchange. Garcia's administration pledged to assist Filipino entrepreneurs to enter sectors controlled by non-Filipino nationals. This Filipino First initiative was fully supported by Filipino businessmen, asking to include other spheres, aspects of Filipino society, such as in the field of education. Educators were also very supportive and suggested to incorporate a distinctly Filipino concept of education so that we could have freedom to design our own pattern of education, which is more responsive to our own peculiar need. Socialism with Filipino characteristics. It is interesting to note that the Philippines was not alone in the aspiration for economic nationalization and industrialization. Many countries as well in Asia, Latin America, and Africa, and when we look at our map over here, Asia, Latin America, Africa. Woo-hoo-hoo. Anyway, sorry. Um, everyone's still there? Good. Okay. Um, where's my tab here? There we go. Okay. Okay, I kind of got a bit on a long-winded here, maybe reading more than I had to, but hopefully this is interesting for you guys. So many countries in Asia, Latin America, and Africa were doing the same thing. They likewise gave priorities to their citizens over foreigners in the business activities. While eager to welcome foreign investments, they made it a point that alien investors could be put in the secondary and tertiary industries and reserved to themselves, either to the government or their own nationals, the basic industries, which are the very core of the industrial development of the country. Sounds so unfair, doesn't it? You know, the foreigners are not allowed to come over and dominate our industries. That's so illogical, you know? So illogical, it has to be put a stop to. And we have to make sure that countries don't control their own industries so that the Americans and the Israelis can. Yay. Similarly, in making the Filipino First policy slogan, it does not mean that the Philippines will no longer welcome the foreign capital. The policy was not intended for exclusiveness or anti-foreigner. It is just that the development of basic industries must be kept for the Filipino nationals for the control of such enterprises. In his speech delivered on the occasion of the ROTC Field Day in Baguio City in February 1960, President Garcia stated that. So this is my long-winded trying to get to making my point about 1960. So I hope you guys are enjoying it, whatever. I feel like this speech might have been kind of important historically, but I don't know. It's just something I came across. And in light of all the other 1960 connections, I feel like maybe it's worthy of being a connection. So the nationalism I speak of is not, as the critics of my administration would want to understand it, designed to exclude for participation in the utilization of the opportunities in commerce and trade with which our country is so abundantly endowed, the aliens among us and those who might want to come here to share with us the wealth of the land, but to give every Filipino preference and priority over them, since this is the only way as a people can we assert our independence and to keep alive national dignity and self-respect. Neither does it contemplate isolation from the rest of the world. Rather than deny, it promotes healthier relations with other nations, since in asserting our national sovereignty in international affairs, we bring to the attention of the whole world the fact of the equality of nations, be they large or small. So that part to me is important, right? Because we're trying to figure out like globally how to achieve de-dollarization and the new world order and multipolarity. It has to be that the fact of the equality of nations, whether they're large or small, is brought to the attention to the whole world, right? So economic development is the most cherished prerogative of the young developing nations of the world, and this desire finds expression in the various political and social ideologies that are identified in Asian societies during those times. Regardless of political ideologies, whether it is democratic, socialist, or communist, the goal is the same. In essence, to shake off the yoke of alien domination in business, trade, commerce, and industry. Philippine economy fared well since the control of foreign exchange was initiated in 1949. In the same year, according to the central bank, Filipino constituted 55% of the investment in new enterprises. Chinese accounted for 37%, Americans 5%, and other nationalities 3%. By 1961, 3 years after the enactment of the Filipino First policy, Filipinos' proportion of capital investment had risen to 88%, Chinese 10%, American and other investors 2%. Okay, so Why is Filipino now on the side of it's like an under the American boot now? Because in 1960 something had to change because somebody said something he wasn't allowed to say, or tried to do something, tried to continue to do something they were not allowed to do. The good example was a threat. It had to be taken care of. So now let me talk about Indonesia briefly, because tie them in with their 1960 thing. I just got to find the right article. I don't know if I properly had it set aside though. So I might just have to wrap up here shortly, but maybe at least I'll share this here, even if it doesn't. It's kind of in the ballpark, whatever. It might not have the. This is where sometimes your theory is bullshit because you're trying to be aesthetic about it. I want it all to be exactly 1960, and if it doesn't work, right? If it's 1960 or 1965, close enough, right? So, I feel like there's something nagging at me or whatever. I was pretty sure I found the connection anyway, but I don't know. And I'm just doing that thing where it's like wasting time trying to find something better, but it's not actually there. Well, there's also the civil rights movement was a cornerstone of the 1960s. So everyone knows that in the U.S., that's where the left was really strong in the 1960s. But it's interesting to see in the 1960s what other people are doing around the world and stuff. Yeah, whatever. Not there. So my bad. Let me go back to this and then just wrap it up. And, okay, here we go. So was China behind the September 30, 1965 failed coup? Decades have passed, and Indonesians are keen to debate what exactly happened on the fateful night of September 30, 1965, and during the months-long communist purge that followed. Last year, an attempt at reconciliation was made by the National Commission on Human Rights with a two-day symposium called Dissecting the Tragedy of 1965, the Historical Approach, although it ended with no meaningful result. Let me try and make sure I need to read all of this. This is one of the things. I guess there was some documents declassified in China, but then they reclassified them. I don't know if that says that here, but sometimes these declassified documents are useful to learn about, even though it's kind of a waste of time talking about it fucking 75 years later or whatever. So what happened on September 30th, 1965? The generally accepted version was that on September 30, 1965, 6 army generals were kidnapped, murdered, and buried in Lubang Buaya, Jakarta. The PKI was blamed for the failed coup attempt. I think the PKI is the Filipino, or not Filipino, Indonesian Communist Party. So the PKI was blamed for the failed coup attempt, thus the G30S PKI term, whatever that means. An Army Special Operations Battalion quickly took control and captured PKI leaders. What followed was the systematic killing of PKI members and sympathizers from across the country from late 1965 until 1966. The PKI was disbanded, and communism and Marxist-Leninism as an ideology were banned. Before 1965, relations between the Indonesian armed forces, particularly its army with the PKI, was tense. 3 years after Indonesian independence, a revolt was staged by the PKI under the People's Democratic Front in Madiun, Central Java, which was ended by the army. As the PKI later focused on its electoral struggle, became the army's rival as a mass-based institution, and winning at that with better political machinery, at least at the grassroots level, according to scholar Adam Schwartz. Just before September 30, 1965, there was an attempt by the PKI to arm civilians as the fifth force, practically threatening the military's monopoly on such matters. Why was the U.S. interested in the communist movement in Indonesia? Well, we already went through it, right? Was involved in the Cold War, rival with communist power USSR and China. Both were nuclear powers. Um, the Truman Doctrine, the domino theory, U.S. foreign policy maintained a sphere of interest free from communism. Domino theory meant that should one state fall to communism, other states in the area would follow. Therefore, a left-leaning state had to be secured so that the danger was contained. Thus, the containment policy of genocide. In 1965, the U.S. and the Soviet Union were also fighting a proxy war in Vietnam, which was met with strong opposition from academics and the younger generation. So there's interesting threads, historical threads that have not been cut up like all the way to today. So they do have the power to for us to kind of claim the legacy of this 1960s movement in a way, if we can do it without being co-opted, right? So a declassified letter dated August 5th from former finance minister Safruddin Prawiran Negara to former USAID administrator Edwin Fox revealed the former's belief that the U.S. was winning and is following the only right path, blah, blah, blah. So basically a comprador piece of shit. Was following the only right path, which leads to a necessary containment of aggressive communism. Dum dum dum. Safruddin justified the war by arguing that it was a necessary self-defense move against aggressive atheism like communism, right? Indonesia was particularly significant as the PKI was the third largest communist party in the world after those in the Soviet Union and China. So imagine what the world would have been like had this not happened, risking the entire Southeast Asia descending further into communism. President Sukarno at that time was waging war against Western imperialism, which he called Nekolim, resulting in a rather hostile sentiment against the U.S. So think about that. They're trying to... This article is called, Was China Behind the September 30, 1965 Failed Coup? So why would they coup this guy Sukarno, who was waging war against Western imperialism? How make that make sense, right? It doesn't. There's no motivation to coup. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So it does make sense that the U.S. would want to do this coup, though. So an airgram dated December 21st, 1965 from the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta notes a change of atmosphere, increasingly warm cordiality, and a fantastic switch after the September 30th movement. So that fantastic switch, that's interesting, okay? That this language of all languages, whatever happens to be, what do I see in Reuters, October 2nd, 2025? Sustainable switch. Gen Z protests spread across the globe. Maybe that's a coincidence. Maybe I'm just reading into things because whatever, you start to see things. It's called the frequency illusion or whatever. When you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So, but back to what I was talking about, because I'm trying to wrap up here now, because I'm just kind of probably boring at least somebody out there, but that's all good. So, there was a change of atmosphere, a fantastic switch after the September 30 movement. Commenting on the Army's takeover of state news agency Antara, which the embassy called long one of our most articulate and harmful enemies, the report says, on the whole, a fresh breeze is blowing. The winds of change, eh? Roses smell like poo. So, Was the PKI actually behind the September 30 movement? Telegram 1516 from the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta to Secretary of State November 20th, 1965, revealed that the U.S. officials knew that PKI supporters and members killed in the large-scale army-led purge had no role in the September 30 movement. Telegram reported of an Australian journalist who had talked to a high-ranking PKI member from Yogyakarta, as well as other members in these places, all of whom claimed to not know about the alleged coup. This despite the Yogyakarta PKI source being among the top 50 cadres in the city and supposedly knowledgeable about PKI matters. Previously, Telegram 7798, dated October 18th, 1965, contained the comment, most encouraging of all, there are more signs people actually putting blame where it belongs, insinuating the U.S. Embassy's belief that the PKI was to blame for the September 30 movement. An earlier Telegram 971, dated October 12, 1965, reported that the Indonesian army had gathered papers that elaborated the PKI's role in the September 30 killings, which Sukarno refused to read. Note that this was before news emerged from the Australian journalists. However, according to Polish First Secretary Andrzej Grażyk, who talked to a PKI Central Committee member, only several key PKI members knew about the coup. The plan came from an outsider, and there was no intention to kill the 6 Army generals. Sukarno was also supposed to back the PKI on October 1st in suppressing a general's council plot, a scenario in which it was the army generals who were plotting against Sukarno and that the PKI was the hero. Telegram 971, dated October 12, 1965, confirmed that the army had indeed planned to depose Sukarno, but it was unclear whether the plan was formulated prior to September 30, 1965, or after. And I am inclined to believe that the plan was formulated prior, and that there is a grain of truth in this idea that there was an army plot to depose Sukarno, and that maybe whatever the PKI members who knew about the coup were trying to stop it, and then recognizing that this plan was going to fail, a new plan was then quickly came up, cobbled together to try and blame the PKI members for the coup. That's just whatever theory, but it's probably, worth considering. In short, it was not clear whether the September 30 coup was really carried out by the PKI. The army and the source from the Polish embassy believed the PKI was involved. Based on our readings, many, if not most, PKI members did not know about the coup. Was China behind the movement? No, the document reveals the efforts to blame China for the September 30 offense were made by the Indonesian army. Okay? They're trying to link Mao Zedong with the aborted coup. In the purely fictitious article, Mao encouraged PKI leader AD to remove the generals. Purely fictitious, so no, he did not actually do that. Telegram A673 states that the anti-China propaganda was motivated to protect Sukarno and to pin the blame on Sukarno's closest allies, the PKI and China. The report author notes that we do not think the Chinese were a primary factor in the movement. So the U.S. does a coup on Indonesia, tries to pin it on China, and then massacres like a whole bunch of, not just like the communists in Indonesia, but like the Chinese citizens in Indonesia were also targeted in all of this backlash. This is where you got to kind of, so when you're analyzing whatever, who's really behind the coup, whatever, you see who this Sukarno guy is taken over by the Suharto guy, who is rabidly anti-communist. So that would be what the Americans want. And now they're letting him back into the country, whatever, after banning him for years. So that's that, I guess. Let me see if I got some. Oh, I wanted to kind of close off on an interesting little thing to note about democracy in 2024, because it's just a weird historical turning point that we're at. I don't know if I got it. I think it's here. Billions voted in 2024, but major new report exposes cracks in global democracy. So 2024 was like a super cycle for elections. I think it was the like the most democratic year of all time, if you could put it that way. Described by Time magazine as the year of elections, 2024 saw 1.6 billion people head to the polls across 74 national elections in 62 countries, an unprecedented concentration of democratic activity in a single year. But what they're saying is there's often a troubling picture of how these elections were conducted. There's been a decline in election quality across several prominent democracies: Mexico, the UK, Indonesia. Okay, and then of course the ones they say are the worst are the ones that they opportunistically want to overthrow. But there's, I think the U.S. has also experienced decline in electoral quality, right? So that I just wanted to quickly say it's really interesting to note how important of a year 2024 was for democracy, and now we look at the question of the number of coups that are happening. So look at this graph. This is today. We are not having the most coups. Historically, the most coups were happening between 1960 and 1980. So that's why I say it's really interesting. The U.S. wants, like, Trump administration and people want to be stuck in the 80s, and then the revolutionary people are more like, no, we like the 60s, bring the hippies back, you know. But if the trend is right, like we hit a low point of coups after the end of the Cold War, like right down to, what is this, 2017, 2018, there was no coups at all. It was just one attempted coup. But 1975 was like the peak of all time for everything: conspiracy, attempted coups, and real coups. So, but we're ramping up again, right? So I think we're headed into a decade of anti-democracy, right? That little golden era, 2024, where that's like the peak watermark or whatever of democracy. I think it's downhill for the next 10 years. It's pretty abysmal, whatever, cynical kind of assessment. But let me just read a little bit here. The number of coup attempts and conspiracies to overthrow a government rose substantially around the world since 2021. This is according to data collected by the University of Illinois Klein Center Coup d'etat Project. The researchers found between 14 and 16 such events each year recently, up from mostly single-digit results in the 2000s and 2010s. The number of successful coups also rose, hitting 7 in 2021 and 5 in 2024, up from a maximum of 4 in the previous decades. The numbers, however, do not surpass earlier counts from the 1960s or 1970s, when an average of 20 coups and attempts per year were the norm, including up to 18 successful ones annually. So keep that in mind when we're talking about Mr. Donald Trump, the next Nobel Peace Prize winner, most likely. That whatever peace that they have achieved is very, very temporary, and we are likely about to see an upsurge in violence around the world, okay? Talking about political violence in the States being such a big whatever. Don't let your country be the one that creates this whatever wildfire of political violence around the rest of the world, and then at home pretend like you actually care about political violence, right? So that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's good enough. Here. So since the end of the Second World War, there have been more than 450 successful coups worldwide. In the 1960s, there were 103, while between 1970 and 1979, there were 95. Previous to 2021, this had dropped considerably to an average of just 22 successful coups per decade since the turn of the millennia. If extrapolated, the current tally would be the equivalent of 38 coups in the current decade, almost double the previous decade's count. So that's that. That's the end of my show tonight. I don't know if that's a great note to leave on. Gotta go. Bye. Have a good night, Antediluvian. I don't know how long ago you said that. You're probably not even there anymore. I'm getting out of here too. So, Bella, how you doing? Good girl. A bourgeois democracy is no democracy at all. Exactly. So as much as they're all like, oh, we got such a wonderful year for all these elections and whatnot, but we are in a bit of a the there's something of a contradiction there. We need to be careful about where we're not supportive of bourgeois democracy, but are we Democrats? In a sense, I'd say we should want to maintain that. We don't want to say communists are not Democrats, right? I'm pretty sure Lenin and them were Democrats in a very specific, objective kind of sense, right? So we want to tear down bourgeois society. We don't want to tear down democracy. And to attack bourgeois democracy makes us look like we're authoritarians, and they always love to play that up. But we do have to successfully navigate this protection. We are the protectors of democracy, right? Like socialists, communists, anarchists. We are the ones who actually love and care about democracy. And it's just projection for them to try and say that we actually don't give a shit about it. Because that's the thing, also to hold accountable the revolutionary governments that promise emancipation of the working class, and then they don't really actually deliver on that. What is it that we are criticizing them for? Not being democratic. Just the same thing as we criticize the capitalists for not being democratic. So what are we trying to achieve? Democracy, right? So that's where people say, you liberal, whatever, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, right? So what's your alternative then, right? You're just dictators for the rest of all of time until we're all gone. That's a better system. I feel like even if we are suffering inefficiency from our government because people cannot agree, that is better than suffering the inefficiency of nobody even having the opportunity to have disagreements. There are different problems to have, so we gotta pick our poisons. So denotatively democratic, that's an interesting. Yeah, we are the true Democrats, Kieran. Yeah. All right, so that's my show tonight. Now Trump peace, now prize, I believe, because he gets some like spoiled child. Yeah, I bet you he's gonna get that whatever thing, that useless trophy that should not be valued by anyone anymore. So, all right. I don't have a video for closing for you guys, so this is just gonna be one of those quick, abrupt, unsatisfying pullouts. So my bad. Have a good night, everyone. See you next time. Peace.